In Hollywood, some storms arrive with thunder, others come in silence. For these 10 stars, the final enemy was invisible, a quiet shadow moving through the bloodstream, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Behind the lights, applause, and immortal roles, their last chapter was written by a killer no one ever saw coming. Tonight, we followed the final footsteps of those taken by the silent grip of blood clots, tracing the fragile line between life, legacy, and fate.
Number 1. James Stewart. He had lived long enough to see Hollywood change, fade, and rise again. Yet nothing prepared the world for the morning of July 1997, when the quiet passing of James Stewart broke the hearts of millions. At 89, he was more than a legend. He was the gentle soul behind films that shaped generations, a man whose voice carried the warmth of another era. But behind that calm presence, something far more dangerous had been growing, silent and unseen. A blood clot formed deep within his leg, deep vein thrombosis, slowly waiting for its moment. When it finally traveled upward, blocking the arteries of his lungs, the attack was swift and merciless, leaving no time for goodbyes. For months, those close to him had noticed a soft decline. Stewart had battled heart rhythm problems, and the death of his beloved wife 3 years earlier had dimmed a spark inside him. He spent his days in quiet reflection at his Beverly Hills home, surrounded by memories of a life lived under the golden glow of cinema. Friends described a man who had grown more reserved, but never bitter, gentle even in frailty. No one suspected that the stillness of age, the long hours of sitting, the slow movements, was feeding the danger beneath his skin. When the embolism struck, his heart stopped within minutes, ending a life that had defined Hollywood's golden age. Doctors later explained that his limited mobility made him vulnerable to clots, a tragic irony for a man known for his soft-spoken stillness on screen. Hollywood mourned him deeply. Tributes poured in from around the world, praising his kindness, integrity, and the natural grace that made him unforgettable. At his private funeral, the words, "He lived a wonderful life," were whispered into the silence, carrying both love and loss. No one knew that behind that simple farewell was the quiet truth. An unseen killer had claimed him too soon. Number 2. Garry Shandling. In March 2016, Hollywood was shaken by a tragedy that arrived without a single warning sign. Garry Shandling, the brilliant mind behind The Larry Sanders Show, had spent the morning laughing with friends, answering calls, and talking casually about his blood pressure with the same sharp humor that defined his career. To everyone around him, he seemed healthy, energized, even peaceful. But beneath that calm exterior, a silent threat had already begun its fatal journey. A blood clot formed in his leg, deep vein thrombosis, broke free and traveled upward until it reached his lungs. The pulmonary embolism that followed was massive, immediate, and impossible to escape. He collapsed in his Los Angeles home before he had the chance to call for help. At 66, a man who had spent years bringing laughter to millions was gone in minutes. His friends, including those who had spoken to him just hours earlier, were left stunned. They remembered how focused he had been on his health, practicing meditation, boxing regularly, eating clean, and avoiding the chaos of fame whenever possible. But blood clots do not bargain. They do not warn. They move quietly through the body until their final strike becomes inevitable. Investigators later confirmed he had recently returned from a flight, a detail that made the tragedy even more haunting. Long hours of sitting can slow the flow of blood, giving clots the opportunity to form unnoticed. There were no drugs, no alcohol, no underlying drama, only the cruel precision of a condition that steals life before anyone realizes danger is near. Friends described the days that followed as surreal. Tributes appeared across social media, written by comedians, actors, and writers whose careers he had influenced. Many called him a mentor, a philosopher of comedy, a man who dissected fame with honesty no one else dared to use. Fans replayed clips of his performances, discovering new layers in jokes they had heard 1,000 times. His wit felt sharper,
his reflections deeper now that he was gone. Those closest to him spoke about his compassion, his quiet generosity, and the way he reached out to help struggling artists without expecting anything in return. His death became a painful reminder that life, even in its brightest moments, can be interrupted by something as invisible as a clot moving through a vein. Hollywood lost not just a comedian, but a rare storyteller who understood the absurdity and fragility of existence. His final day, filled with laughter and plans for tomorrow, became a testament to how quickly fate can shift, leaving memories where a life once stood.
Number 3. Dan Blocker. In May 1972, the cast and crew of Bonanza were preparing for another season, unaware that a devastating blow was only hours away. Dan Blocker, the towering presence beloved by millions as Hoss Cartwright, had undergone what doctors described as a routine gallbladder surgery. He was 43, strong, active, and still at the height of his career. No one imagined that something so familiar, so ordinary, could become the doorway to tragedy. But in the quiet hours of his recovery, a blood clot formed deep in his leg. It would travel quickly, silently, until it reached his lungs. The pulmonary embolism struck with brutal force, stopping his heart before anyone could intervene. The news rippled through Hollywood like a shockwave. How could a man so full of humor, kindness, and life disappear so suddenly? His co-stars remembered him as the heart of the Bonanza set, a gentle giant whose laughter filled the soundstage and lifted the morale of everyone around him. Friends spoke of a man who treasured simple joys, cooking outdoors, long talks after filming, and time spent with his wife and children. There had been no signs of danger, no warnings that something hidden and merciless was growing within him. Doctors later explained that the immobility after surgery created the perfect conditions for a clot to form. Even with precautions, blood clots remain one of the most unpredictable complications of post-operative recovery. For Dan, the transition from celebrated actor to silent victim took only minutes. What was supposed to be a straightforward operation became the moment that ended a life millions cherished. His death left a wound not only in his family, but in television history itself. Bonanza, one of the longest-running shows of its era, was never the same. Fans across the country wrote letters, held memorials, and shared stories of how Hoss Cartwright had been a source of comfort, humor, and hope. The network received thousands of messages mourning the man behind the character. Even decades later, his passing remains one of the most heartbreaking moments in television. Dan Blocker's story is a reminder of how fragile the human body can be, even for someone who seemed unstoppable. A simple medical complication became a fatal chain of events, claiming a man who brought warmth to millions. His smile beneath the wide-brimmed hat still lingers in memory, a final echo of a legend taken too soon by an enemy no one could see. Number 4. Mario Lanza. In October 1959, the world of music and cinema awoke to news that felt impossible to comprehend. Mario Lanza, the voice once hailed as the most powerful tenor of the century, had been found lifeless in his Rome hotel room. He was only 38, still full of hope, still dreaming of a triumphant return to the stage. His final days were supposed to mark a new beginning. Instead, they became the closing chapter of a life lived at breathtaking speed. The official cause of death was a pulmonary embolism. A blood clot had formed quietly, traveled through his veins, and lodged in his lungs, cutting off his oxygen in an instant. By the time help arrived, the man whose voice had once filled opera halls was already gone. Lanza had been battling exhaustion and a roller coaster of health problems for years. The pressures of fame, the demands of performance, and the constant struggle with weight had strained both his body and his spirit. Italy had become his refuge, a place where he hoped to rest, recover, and reclaim the artistic fire that had carried him from Philadelphia's streets to international stardom. Friends said that in those last weeks he seemed hopeful. Tired, yes, but determined. He spoke of new film projects, new music, and a future that felt just within reach. But pulmonary embolisms do not wait for dreams to take shape. They strike in silence. On the morning of his death, he reported feeling weak and short of breath, yet dismissed it as fatigue. A few hours later, he collapsed. The clot had traveled into his lungs and blocked the blood flow almost instantly. Doctors later suggested that prolonged rest and underlying cardiovascular strain created the perfect storm. His wife Betty was shattered. The loss crushed her so deeply that she died just a few months later, leaving behind a story that felt more like a tragic aria than real life. Mario Lanza's funeral drew thousands. Fans wept openly in the streets as his recordings played over loudspeakers, his voice soaring once last time above a grieving crowd. Colleagues mourned not only the artist, but the man, brilliant, passionate, flawed, and unforgettable. Behind the stage lights and applause was a life marked by intensity, desperation, and an unyielding hunger for perfection. His death was a reminder that even the brightest flames can burn out abruptly, leaving behind only echoes of what once was. To this day, his voice remains powerful, haunting, and eternal. An echo of a star silenced not by scandal or decay, but by a quiet, merciless clot that ended a comeback the world never got to see.
Number 5. Glenn Headley. In June 2017, Hollywood received the kind of news that leaves a sudden hollow quiet. Glenn Headley, a woman known for her luminous grace and understated brilliance, had died unexpectedly in a Santa Monica hospital. She was 62, still working, still shaping characters with the gentle precision that made her one of the most quietly remarkable actresses of her generation. There were no warnings, no dramatic signs, just a brief complaint of breathlessness, dismissed as exhaustion, and then the silent, lethal strike of a pulmonary embolism. A blood clot had lodged in her lungs, cutting off her oxygen and ending her life before doctors could intervene. She had been filming a new television series, delighting the crew with her warmth and dry humor. Colleagues recalled how she laughed easily, asked about their families, and carried herself with the humility of someone who valued people far more than fame. In her final hours, she spoke to her husband and son with optimism about the future, unaware that something deadly was already forming deep within her veins. Pulmonary embolisms are often described as silent assassins, and for Glenn, the strike was swift and cruel. Her death stunned the industry. Glenn Headley had built a career rooted not in spotlight chasing, but in authenticity. From Dirty Rotten Scoundrels to Mr. Holland's Opus, she carried a softness that made her characters feel achingly human. Directors praised her natural instincts, actors admired her generosity, audiences loved her sincerity. She had never needed spectacle, only truth, and she gave it in every performance. Doctors later explained that the clot likely developed from prolonged periods of sitting during filming and travel. A simple reality of working life turned into the first link in a fatal chain. There were no outward signs, no dramatic decline, just the hidden danger of a clot waiting for its moment. Her passing reminded Hollywood that even its most grounded souls are not immune to the unpredictability of the body. In the days that followed, tributes came from across generations. Steve Martin called her one of the most natural performers he had ever known. Fans revisited her films, finding comfort in the quiet, emotional depth she left behind. Her career was proof that greatness doesn't always roar. It can whisper too, and still echo for decades. Glenn Headley's final chapter was written not by scandal or decay, but by the soft cruelty of fate. A life defined by artistry and kindness was cut short by a silent clot, leaving behind the memory of a woman whose talent glowed not through noise, but through soul.
Number 6. John Pinette. In April 2014, the world of comedy was shaken by a loss that felt both sudden and deeply unfair. John Pinette, the man whose voice, energy, and gentle humor had brought laughter to millions, was found unresponsive in his Pittsburgh hotel room. He was 57, still performing, still traveling the country with the kind of optimism that made audiences feel like they were in the presence of an old friend. Just days earlier, he had been on stage, delivering jokes with his trademark warmth. No one in the crowd knew they were watching one of his final performances. The cause of death was a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had formed quietly in his legs before traveling to his lungs, stealing his breath and stopping his heart. To his fans, he had always been a symbol of resilience. His comedy often explored the struggles of everyday life, food, family, exhaustion, with a vulnerable honesty that made people feel seen. Behind the laughter, however, he had been living with health issues for years. Obesity, sleep apnea, and the pressure of constant touring had put tremendous strain on his heart and circulation. Friends later revealed that he had been working hard to improve his health, pushing himself to lose weight and rebuild his strength. But pulmonary embolisms are silent predators. They move without warning, waiting for the smallest opening to become catastrophic. On that April morning, there were no desperate calls, no dramatic final moments. The clot struck instantly, leaving no time to fight. Those who knew him best said the suddenness made the loss even harder to accept. He had been talking about future shows, new material, and the possibility of slowing down to focus on his well-being. There was so much left he wanted to say, so much laughter he still had to give. The tributes that followed were heartfelt and overwhelming. Fellow comedians called him gentle, generous, and profoundly kind. Audiences shared memories of the first time they heard him describe a buffet, a diet, or a childhood embarrassment with such disarming honesty that the entire room erupted in laughter. His humor was never cruel, never sharp-edged. It was human, and that humanity made the loss feel personal. Doctors later explained that the clot had likely formed during periods of inactivity, a risk heightened by his health conditions. But explanations did little to ease the grief of those who had loved his voice, his presence, and the comfort of his comedy. What remained was a silence far heavier than the laughter he once created. John Pinette's final chapter was quiet, but his legacy lives loudly in the joy he brought, the warmth he shared, and the reminder that even the brightest spirits can be taken suddenly by dangers we never see coming.
Number 7. Wendell Middlebrooks. In March 2015, the entertainment world was stunned by the sudden death of Wendell Middlebrooks, a rising star whose presence on screen felt like a burst of warmth in every role he touched. At only 36 years old, he had already built a reputation as one of television's most lovable character actors, known for his appearances in Scrubs, Body of Proof, and the unforgettable Beer Delivery Man commercials that made millions smile. His life was filled with momentum, opportunity, and promise, but on a quiet evening in his Los Angeles home, a silent threat ended everything in an instant. A pulmonary embolism struck, swift, lethal, and completely unexpected, claiming his life before help could arrive. Those who had seen him in the days before described nothing out of the ordinary. Wendell had been celebrating new career prospects, laughing easily, and planning for the future with the boundless optimism that defined him. He spent time with his family that weekend, telling jokes, sharing stories, and offering the kind of warmth that made people feel instantly at ease. There were no signs of danger, no warning that a blood clot had already begun its fatal journey through his veins. Doctors later explained that the clot had likely formed in his leg, a condition known as deep vein thrombosis. It could have been triggered by long periods of sitting during work, travel, or simply the nonstop pace of life. When the clot broke free and reached his lungs, it blocked the flow of oxygen, causing his heart to stop almost immediately. There was nothing anyone could have done. The silent timing of it all made the tragedy even crueler. His colleagues mourned him deeply. Directors spoke of his professionalism, his infectious positivity, and the rare gift he had for elevating every scene he touched. Fellow actors described him as the kind of man who made long days on set feel lighter, who offered encouragement freely, and who never treated success as something to hoard. Fans poured out tributes on social media, sharing memories of how his performances had brought them joy at moments when they needed it most. Wendell's career had only begun to unfold. He had the talent, the passion, and the heart of someone destined for decades of unforgettable work. Instead, his story became a stark reminder of how fragile life can be, especially when the enemy is invisible. A blood clot moving silently through the body, waiting to strike without mercy. His absence left behind a void that felt disproportionate to his short time in the spotlight. But the warmth he gave the world, the laughter he sparked, and the kindness he carried will linger far longer than the brief, tragic moment that ended his life. Number 8. David Bloom. In April 2003, far from the glamour of Los Angeles, tragedy struck on the scorching sands of Iraq.
David Bloom, one of NBC's most respected journalists, had been reporting from the front lines with a passion and fearlessness that captured the attention of millions watching from home. At 39, he was in peak form, charismatic, tireless, unwavering in his commitment to tell the truth from a place where every sunrise carried danger. But the threat that claimed him did not come from gunfire, explosions, or enemy forces. It came from within. A deep vein thrombosis had formed silently during the long, confined hours spent riding inside a cramped military vehicle. When the clot broke loose and traveled to his lungs, the pulmonary embolism was immediate and fatal. In the days leading up to his death, Bloom had shown no signs of serious illness. He filmed reports with a broad smile, spoke to his colleagues with excitement, and called home regularly to reassure his wife and 3 daughters that he was safe. What no one saw was the hidden danger building inside him. The continuous hours of sitting in armored vehicles, a routine of the battlefield, had restricted his blood flow, creating the perfect conditions for a clot to form. Doctors would later confirm that the embolism struck without warning, a silent assassin that killed him long before medics could reach him. His fellow reporters and the soldiers he traveled with were devastated. Many recalled how he never once complained about the harsh conditions, the heat, the dust, the sleepless nights. Instead, he focused on his mission, to document the war honestly, to bring viewers as close to the truth as possible. His last broadcasts were marked by clarity, passion, and a determination that resonated deeply with audiences back home. The outpouring of grief that followed was overwhelming. News anchors struggled to hold back tears as they reported on the death of one of their own. Viewers wrote thousands of messages describing how Bloom's courage and authenticity had made them feel connected to a distant war. His wife, Melanie, later spoke openly about the hidden dangers of deep vein thrombosis, turning her husband's tragedy into a mission to save others from the same fate. Her advocacy became a powerful voice, shining a light on a condition most people never think about until it is too late. David Bloom's story stands as one of the most heartbreaking reminders that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in stillness, in routine, in the small moments we overlook. He survived the chaos of war only to be taken by something utterly silent. His legacy endures in the lives he touched, the truths he risked everything to report, and the awareness he unintentionally sparked in the wake of his passing. His final chapter was a testament to the fragility of even the strongest spirits and the quiet power of a man driven by purpose until his very last breath.
Number 9. Brittany Murphy. In December 29, Hollywood awoke to a tragedy that felt unreal, almost impossible to accept. Brittany Murphy, bright, talented, endlessly expressive, was gone at just 32 years old. To the world, she was the star of Clueless, 8 Mile, and countless roles that showed her remarkable ability to shift from innocence to depth in a heartbeat. But behind her wide smile and soft voice, a storm had been building quietly. The official reports focused on pneumonia and anemia, yet hidden beneath those conditions was a fatal complication: acute pulmonary edema, the sudden and devastating buildup of fluid in the lungs, often triggered by circulatory collapse. It was a silent chain reaction her weakening body could no longer fight. In the months before her death, Brittany had been struggling more than the public realized. She complained of shortness of breath, fatigue, and a feeling of constant exhaustion. The pressures of Hollywood, the chaos surrounding her career, and the emotional weight she carried behind closed doors had begun to take their toll. Friends remembered moments when she seemed fragile, pushing herself through illness because she feared disappointing the people who relied on her. The woman who had once brought life to every room she entered was being slowly drained by a mix of stress, declining health, and a body pushed beyond its limit. On the morning she collapsed, her husband called for help in desperation as she struggled to breathe. By the time paramedics arrived, the situation had already slipped too far. Her lungs were filling with fluid, her oxygen dropping rapidly, a deadly process connected to the same circulatory failures that often lead to pulmonary embolism. Doctors fought to revive her, but the damage had already been done. Within minutes,
Brittany Murphy's life had slipped away, leaving behind a silence that felt unbearably heavy. Her death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Fans were stunned, unable to comprehend how someone so young, so full of promise, could vanish in a single morning. Co-stars shared memories of her kindness, her nervous laugh, the way she went out of her way to make others feel comfortable. Director spoke about her dedication, how she threw her entire heart into every role, even when she wasn't well enough to perform. But what haunted many was how alone she seemed in her final months, surrounded by pressure, illness, and circumstances that left her vulnerable to the silent dangers growing inside her. Just 5 months later, her husband died under eerily similar conditions: acute pneumonia, anemia, and pulmonary complications, deepening the mystery and tragedy that surrounded their final days. The public searched for explanations, but the simple truth remained: Brittany Murphy, a radiant force of emotion and talent, had been undone by the hidden collapse of her body, the kind that strikes quickly, quietly, and without mercy.
Number 9. Brittany Murphy. In December 2009, Hollywood awoke to a tragedy that felt unreal, almost impossible to accept. Brittany Murphy, bright, talented, endlessly expressive, was gone at just 32 years old. To the world, she was the star of Clueless, 8 Mile, and countless roles that showed her remarkable ability to shift from innocence to depth in a heartbeat. But behind her wide smile and soft voice, a storm had been building quietly. The official reports focused on pneumonia and anemia, yet hidden beneath those conditions was a fatal complication: acute pulmonary edema, the sudden and devastating buildup of fluid in the lungs, often triggered by circulatory collapse. It was a silent chain reaction her weakening body could no longer fight. In the months before her death, Brittany had been struggling more than the public realized. She complained of shortness of breath, fatigue, and a feeling of constant exhaustion. The pressures of Hollywood, the chaos surrounding her career, and the emotional weight she carried behind closed doors had begun to take their toll. Friends remembered moments when she seemed fragile, pushing herself through illness because she feared disappointing the people who relied on her. The woman who had once brought life to every room she entered was being slowly drained by a mix of stress, declining health, and a body pushed beyond its limit. On the morning she collapsed, her husband called for help in desperation as she struggled to breathe. By the time paramedics arrived, the situation had already slipped too far. Her lungs were filling with fluid, her oxygen dropping rapidly, a deadly process connected to the same circulatory failures that often lead to pulmonary embolism. Doctors fought to revive her, but the damage had already been done. Within minutes, Brittany Murphy's life had slipped away, leaving behind a silence that felt unbearably heavy. Her death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Fans were stunned, unable to comprehend how someone so young, so full of promise, could vanish in a single morning. Co-stars shared memories of her kindness, her nervous laugh, the way she went out of her way to make others feel comfortable. Directors spoke about her dedication, how she threw her entire heart into every role, even when she wasn't well enough to perform. But what haunted many was how alone she seemed in her final months, surrounded by pressure, illness, and circumstances that left her vulnerable to the silent dangers growing inside her. Just 5 months later, her husband died under eerily similar conditions: acute pneumonia, anemia, and pulmonary complications, deepening the mystery and tragedy that surrounded their final days. The public searched for explanations, but the simple truth remained: Brittany Murphy, a radiant force of emotion and talent, had been undone by the hidden collapse of her body, the kind that strikes quickly, quietly, and without mercy. To this day, her legacy lingers in the characters she left behind: fragile, fierce, awkward, brilliant, and in the ache of knowing how much more she could have given.
Her story is a reminder that even the brightest stars can disappear in silence, taken by dangers the world never sees until it's too late.